Let me show these suckers how to ball out here. Oh, man, let's get this together here. Oh, layup. Oh, shot. Oh, three. Oh, it's like Brick City out here. Mid-range. Oh, my goodness. I can't buy a bucket out here. I missed the whole damn basket. Oh, my goodness. What's going on, man? My game is looking trash. Oh, here we go. Black Power Media shirt. Now we cooking. Trees. I'm taking on a tree of y'all with these right here. Between the legs. Oh, my goodness. Behind the back. Layup. Oh, and did he just do a reverse? He is in beast mode out here. I ain't got to look. It's falling. Oh, my goodness. This guy is going 3, 2, 1. Kobe. Nice. Black Power Media, baby. Nice. Empower yourself. Go get you some of that Black Power Media again. Right here, blackpowermedia.org. Yeah.
I mix what I like. Yes. What's up, world? Welcome back to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Power Media. I'm Jared Ball, joined by Erica Caines, Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs, and I'm assuming, and right on time, Dr. Orisanmi Burton.
What's going on, fam?
What's happening? I might need to get you to put. Yeah, I think I gotta get you. Hold on, Can you? Do you have any headphones, please? Because I'm getting all the feedback. Or if you don't mind. Okay, thank you very much. But what's up, good people? Welcome to everybody. Like, share, subscribe. Jump on in. How you all feeling today, this afternoon? Good to see everybody again.
Good. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, now that I finally graded papers, I'm happy now. This is just goof off time. This is just another goof off item on the goof off schedule.
That's pretty much how I feel. Grades submitted. Everything finally wrapped up and done. I think I will have to do one grade change. I think I did make a mistake, and I'm happy to correct that, but which is never a pleasant process, to be honest. But
no, it's not. It is so not.
But other than that, I'm all set. So, all right. So I know I have to. Yeah, Ori, the feedback is crazy.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, that's what. If you have headphones, please. You don't have headphones. Oh wow. I don't know exactly what to do about that part then.
So like when his mic is on, the feedback.
Yeah, it's getting. Yeah, you hear that? It's all coming right back. It's too much. It's too much. So we have to figure something out there so that we can hear him. But just in terms of a production schedule, etc. I probably got to leave at 2:50. I got a 3:00 pickup. So, but that's the only thing on my end in terms of time restriction this afternoon. But I am very much looking forward to getting into this discussion because you three, and shout out also to Dr. Keto Swan, encouraged me to watch this joint. So again, I'm not a Star Wars fan. I haven't watched, and I messed this up when I was with Keto and Ori at that conference. And I said, I haven't watched them since the first three. And Keto's face immediately dropped. Yeah, I know I've committed a faux pas. The original three as they were delivered to us once upon a time in my childhood. And then I came back later and took a peek at the newer ones, the prequels. It was not, and I was like, okay, I'm good. It's passed me by, And then Todd, your line is the one that got me. You said Andor is Star Wars, but without the Force and lightsabers, something like that. And you said that's why I would like it and why Star Wars fans did not like it. So I finally watched it. I loved it. And connecting it with Ori's incredible new book and Erica's provocative question that I'm still not ready to respond to. Here we are. So I'll stop there and maybe invite you all to say what you want, but I thought at some point one of you should take the lead in explaining to folks what Andor is, explain what we're talking about. And
yeah. If I'm Erica, is that all right?
Yeah, please. Yeah, I would prefer it.
Okay. Brother Burton, I gotta say this one thing to you though. It is very important. I say this one very serious thing before I go into complete geek mode. Dr. Ball knows this side of me, and he's dealt with it for over 20 years. But this is where I get to completely geek out. So he knows I'm excited. So let me say one serious thing as a member of African descent to you, and then we can do this. Your book caused me physical pain. You were not the only person in pain about your book. I was in pain reading your book. But I will thank you forever for writing that book. And let me tell you why.
Yeah.
As a biographer of Mumia Abu-Jamal, there was never a question that I understood. There was this thing that just kept popping up, right? And I was just like, why the Faulkner, the widow and the police, the Fraternal Order Police and those folks, like, why are they so angry? They won. The man got sentenced to death. He's been in jail for 40 years. He's been in jail for 40. His anniversary. It's like 41st anniversary, 42nd anniversary. He's been in jail. What are they so upset about? They are the most sore winners I've ever seen in any sort of historical analysis or whatever. And your book gave me the answer. And I'm going to tell you what the answer is. When you went into how they dealt with us physically, the experimentation, that the fact that they wanted us dead, that they saw us more than just a little more than living cadavers, I said, that's why they're so angry. Because as Mumia himself has said, they don't just want my death, they want my silence. And they can't silence him, but they also can't do the things they really want to do to him that would make him silent. The psychological things, the physical things, they can't do it. That's why they're so angry. And I didn't know that until I read your book. So I want to profusely, I've done this on Twitter, but I haven't done it here on YouTube. I want to profusely thank you for that book.
Is the feedback on?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
you're
perfect.
fine.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to say, just that, it's an honor that what I wrote is helpful for you. So I just want to express my gratitude, and I learned a lot while writing the book, and I'm happy that others are able to share in that experience as well.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, thank you. So now that we've done that serious minute, now I'm going to go to my other side of my double consciousness. All right. So, Andor. All right. Let me explain. Let me explain a little bit about Star Wars stuff. Now, forgive me, folks. I live on websites when I'm not on Black Power Media. I live on websites like Heavy Spoilers and New Rock Stars and some of you know, but some of you know about these sites. Some of you are pretending not to know. Some of you don't know, right? But there are all these geek websites on that have long involved discussions about Marvel and Star Wars and Game of Thrones and all that. And I live on these sites. In fact, you can see I comment on like almost every video. Like I'm one of the number one commenters. I get a quick heart from all these people because I'm just always there. So I'm going to represent that community in this conversation because you guys are very serious revolutionaries and scholars and all of that. And you see the hat I have on. You see my Dr. Doom in the back, right? So I'm going to let you guys be real serious and revolutionary, and I'm going to geek out and have fun. So, what is Andor? Let me explain this to the uninitiated, to the ungeekified, like Dr. Ball, who's a very serious Black man. Now, Star Wars, by the way, the original Star Wars, by the way, is now called Star Wars: A New Hope. All right. So if you're a geek, that's how you have to refer to it as now. Star Wars: A New Hope, right? Star Wars: A New Hope begins, as you remember, when Darth Vader stops this transport, this Republic transport that Princess Leia is on. And Princess Leia is a delegate or representative or whatever. And he goes, "No, you're a rebel spy." And she takes this kind of material, this kind of spy information, and puts it in R2-D2. And then R2-D2 and C-3PO go out. They go out through the pods or whatever, and they go to the planet Tatooine, right? Okay. That's the beginning of Star Wars, right? Okay. There is a prequel. Now, for my money, I've seen all the Star Wars movies, okay? I've suffered through the prequels, and I've suffered through the sequels, right? And the prequels are only good now because there's a whole animated universe of Star Wars stuff that has made the sequels better, which is really a whole nother conversation, right? And the guy who's in charge of the animation is now the guy in charge of Star Wars. All right. So there's one movie, there's one prequel that was made. It's the only Star Wars movie I recommend other than the original three. It's called Star Wars Rebel One. Now, what is Star Wars Rebel One is about? Star Wars Rebel One is a whole movie that shows how Princess Leia got that spy information to put into R2-D2. Star Wars Rebel One ends with another viewpoint of the first 5 minutes of Star Wars, right? And the lead, there's a male lead and a female lead of that movie. The male lead of Star Wars Rebel One is the lead character of Andor.
Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
You said Rebel One or Rogue One?
I'm sorry, it's Rogue One, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Rogue One. Okay,
Rogue
right.
One,
That
yeah.
that's helpful
Hey,
because
I was like, hold on, I'm getting put onto some whole new stuff for a
Right,
second
right.
there. Okay,
I
okay,
know this.
okay.
I know this
I'm with
history.
you. I'm with
Good.
you.
So
Okay,
I'm
okay.
glad. That's like, I'm glad.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
so
okay.
excited.
I'm with it. I'm with it. All right.
'Cause I'm still trying to remember all the stuff myself. I'm glad you helped me
Right.
out.
No, I
So
can.
it's Rogue One, right? It's Rogue One, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Rogue One is the prequel
To Andor.
to Andor, and it's also because it's the direct prequel to A New Hope, because the last 5
Right.
minutes of it is the first 5 minutes of Star Wars, but from a different angle or whatever, right?
Right.
So Andor, if I have this right, Andor and Rogue One are like the 5 years prior to the events of the first Star Wars. So this
Yes.
Andor is about how dude got radicalized to be the character he is in Rogue One.
hmm
Okay, good. I got that right. Okay, that's good.
Right. Because the
That's
Clone Wars happens before Andor. So the prequels, then Andor, then Rogue One,
Right.
then Rogue One and New Hope are happening simultaneously.
Right, because Rogue One leads directly into the Rogue One leads directly into Star Wars, right? It's the same time period.
Yes.
And this time period, Andor is like the 5 years prior to Rogue One.
Yes.
And at least that's what it's supposed to be. So
Yes.
how this guy got radicalized to be the character in Rogue One that leads directly to Star Wars and New Hope. Yep, that's it.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
And yeah, okay, right. Sorry.
Because by
Yeah,
the
go
time
ahead.
we get to Andor, we see that in the series that when he talks he tried to hide his history. He talks about having been a cook during the Clone Wars. So that's how we know the prequels happen, and then Andor,
Right.
and then Rogue One.
Right. Because the Clone Wars changes everything. And the Clone Wars and the fall of Anakin is the beginning of the Empire. The Empire comes out of the ashes of the Republic, right? So in the beginning of Star Wars: A New Hope, Princess Leia is still pretending she's a member of the Republic when she's really a member of the Rebellion. She's really an underground warrior in the Rebellion.
Right.
All right.
Well,
What I'm thinking is, because I want us to stay focused, because the more you start talking about Princess Leia and Darth Vader, the more I start checking out. That's where I start to that's where I'm like, I want because that's where I'm like, I'm not interested. But I got you.
But then also, I think what makes Rogue One and Andor stand out from the others is that the others are more campy, I would say. Because with the writing and the production and the actual killing, right? Because you don't really see people get killed in the first one, even in the prequel. So I think Andor and Rogue One, because Rogue One is brilliant, I think, as a film. But I think they stand out from the entire Star Wars universe primarily because it's a little more gritty.
Yep.
But it still stays intact with the story. So I do think Todd offers like incredible context, because you do they allude to a lot of these things in the series anyway. But you do kind of need to know that, okay, so he came out of the Clone Wars, and that's why the senator is where she is. That's why she's in her position. This is the tension and dynamics that's existing in the Empire as Andor is going through what he's dealing with.
But I will say, as someone who doesn't understand or know any of this, that even without that context, which I'm sure for those who have it, it makes it even better. It works. Like I don't feel like I wasn't in there like, what is going on? Why are they? It was none of that. It was it wasn't one of those where you have to have seen everything to appreciate this. So which I also appreciate. But
and by the way, this is probably Dr. Ball for you and the very hardcore people in your audience who are not into this stuff. This is probably the only Star Wars you can watch is Andor and Rogue One, because if you try to watch a Star Wars show now, you will not know what is going on, because just like when you go to a Marvel movie and you have to know like what happened in like 8 other Marvel movies to understand the plot of this Marvel movie, because the animation guy took over Star Wars, he's made Star Wars shows that if you have not watched like 50 or 80 or 100 animated series episodes, you will not know what's going on. So if you try to watch Ahsoka, you'll be like, who are these people? What's going on? Like, you won't know unless you like literally go watch one of these videos on YouTube that will explain to you. And they take a half hour to explain to you all the stuff that you don't know that will make you watch Ahsoka and all of that, or Mandalorian or whatever. So these are the only thing for this audience. I would suggest that Rogue One and Andor and maybe Star Wars and the original movies are really the only ones you should really check out, because the rest actually require like 100 hours of like watching stuff.
Mm-hmm. So how do you all want to proceed? Because I know, Erica, you brought up some, again, very provocative questions related specifically to Ori's book. Ori, I don't know if you want to chime in and talk specifically about points from Andor that you wanted us to get to. I have my little list, but I would like to recede a little bit, to be honest, and check out what you all have to say.
I could say a few things.
Sure.
The first thing is it's nice to be in this particular space because I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan here. I've just learned that, right? So like, I was huge into the first 3. When I was a kid, I recorded them off TV, off the VCR, and like watched them joints over and over and over again, including the like commercials, which continue to be like outdated as the years went on. But I haven't caught up with the whole universe since Disney bought it and it expanded, or read the books and all the other things. But the thing that always struck me as interesting is in an interview with George Lucas, who wrote the original Star Wars, he was very clear, that he didn't like the initial direction that the Disney products were going. And he said that specifically because and this is fascinating, that in his mind, Star Wars, the original 3, the New Hope trilogy, was about the Vietnamese rebelling against the French and against the U.S.
That's wild.
So I mean, so that's really fascinating. And of course, we have to take it with a grain of salt because he also wrote, Indiana Jones and all this other like intensely racist and colonial stuff. So it's a product of his own limited imagination. But I think Andor and Rogue One are much more serious in their engagement with that history, and that's what struck me about those in general. Like I think Andor came out in 2022, so I was putting the finishing touches on my book, which is about guerrilla warfare. The book is about guerrilla warfare and counterinsurgency. And as I was watching Andor, I was like, damn, the writers clearly read Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare. They read Ho Chi Minh. Like, there's some quotes in there with homeboy Saul Guerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker, whose last name sounds very much like gorilla, first of all. And he's literally in the cave, like he is underground, right? And he's getting into a debate with this other cat. And there's a point at which he says, oppression breeds rebellion, which obviously sounds a lot like what the BLA would say in terms of repression breeds resistance. And then in the next line, the other dude who, they're on the same side, but they're beefing. The other dude is like, settle your quarrels, which I'm like, yo, are they reading George Jackson and the BLA? Like, what is going on?
That can't have been a coincidence.
Right.
That can't be a coincidence.
Yeah.
So it was that level of seriousness with which this engagement with revolutionary warfare was sort of explored that really got me. And the other thing is that, what I've noticed in these products that deal with these media products that deal with sort of like, you know, the concept of revolution is that at some point during the narrative, something happens that ultimately invalidates the sort of ethics or the politics of the people who are the bearers of revolution, right? So it's like they're not really serious, or they're all in it for themselves, or something to where it's like you leave thinking that like the whole project was sort of doomed or deeply flawed from the beginning. It always happens, and I was waiting for it to happen in Andor,
Right.
and it never
Never
happens.
happens.
They show the contradictions, they show the ugly side, they show a lot, but never in a way that leaves you thinking that these people didn't have principles or ethics involved, or that their struggle wasn't rooted in
Right.
something real. And that's what really hit me about Andor.
What what about the character who the actor I recognized from the series The Bear, which I really like too, by the way. Just another aside, talk about. So it's not that I don't watch silly stuff. I know, Todd, you're always joking when, you know, it's half serious when you calling me Dr. Ball and all this other kind of stuff. But my lack of seriousness is just distributed elsewhere. And so I'm forgetting his name, but he's the one that pretended he had a brother. By the way, some spoilers, perhaps.
Yeah,
Maybe.
that's I was gonna ask
Spoiler-
that for sure.
Yeah,
for
we
sure.
should spoiler warning here.
Definitely.
Give people, you know, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you need to check out, come on back later. Blah blah blah. Time wasting. Okay. So, but the one who never trusts Andor,
Right.
Right.
and then
who
is
betrays
revealed.
him. Yeah.
Right. So
Nah, I mean, he's a lumpen element. I mean, that's real. That is a figure in revolutionary struggle who ultimately, you know, is really out for himself or for themselves. Like, that is a representation of a real figure. And it just so happens that Andor, the person who like is assumed to not really have any politics, is the one who's like, yo, first of all, I'm gonna off you. Okay. I'm gonna take my cut that I was promised, and here's your thing, and I'm out.
Right.
And then he goes to an island and he's chilling. Like, that's it for him. And this is one of the things I love also. He eventually gets imprisoned, not because of his actual revolutionary expropriation,
It was
but just
some
on
silly
some random stop and frisk type stuff, which in terms of my research, yo, that happened all the time. There's mad people within the walls who are like, I did not do what I'm in there for, but I did other things that I never got caught for. So that just seemed legit to me.
Yeah. And it felt like kind of like a scary personal nightmare. Like, it's like the Darwin Awards. Now I'm just afraid of dying for some stupid shit, for some dumb shit, or, you know, like I'm gonna get caught for it because somebody was running next to me, because that's what they said. He was running to get out of the way of something, and they were like, you were running, so you're guilty. And
He was running
it sounded
to get out
like
of the way.
Aubrey.
Yeah, he was running to get out of the way of whatever they were running from. Because you remember, he kept looking back, and the fact that he was looking back made him suspicious. Like, oh, what are you looking for? Your friends? Like, you're with them? But I think it's so interesting that you're saying that you were writing this as you were watching this, because I had raised a question with Dr. Ball maybe around Thanksgiving. I think I was on that day, and we were talking about colonization, and it was a trigger warning that was issued for something that happened in Atlanta for a state-sanctioned death. And then I had raised, like, how do we understand ourselves in as a colonized people? That we need to have trigger warnings in ways that when we look at Palestine, they're like pushing it in your face, like, look at it. And then Jared asked if I read your book, and at the time I hadn't read the book yet. I was going to start reading it with Geechee's Barter and Build, but I hadn't read your book yet. And he said, well, read it and then come back to that question, because I think there's some intersections there. And then I read it, but by the time I got to chapter 2 and 3, it kind of made more sense to me what he was saying, why I needed to read the book. But then we talked about Andor, and I know we were supposed to have that conversation, and I was thinking about how so much chapters 2 and 3 specifically for me kind of raised a lot of what I was seeing in Andor. Primarily, we can look at the prison episodes, of course, because I think they definitely speak to that sort of counter-humanism that you raised. But I think overall, when we look at the conditions, right? I think what makes Andor so interesting for me is that they do speak to that colonial question. Like all of those people are a product of colonialization, especially the ones who are in prison, right? Because they've had their land taken, they've had their culture stolen. And you could see a lot of it is cultural imperialism, because even when they talked about the eye, is it Aldeni that where they went and they had that people that went up to the mountain to go see the eye, right? And they talked about that process of making them think that they still have their culture, but it's all occupied, right? They can't even walk up to the mountain without guns on them, but at least they can enjoy their festivities. And you see that replicated when the guy talked about how his dad's pepper farm was burnt down and all that. They strip the culture, they strip the land, and they take from the people. And then the end result, I guess, is that they get in prison. But I was thinking about that sort of dehumanization process that occurs, and then that break that happens in prison, right? Because there was even a person that we talked about last Monday during Barter and Build, and I can't remember the name. I would have to grab the book, but we were talking about like what would make him stay and observe, and then eventually go ahead and participate. And you could see that with the guy who's the head of, like, he's so, as soon as you come in, he got his speech. This is my floor, and they say, don't you have this many seconds, and we better not come in last, and all of that. But then when he realized, wait a minute, if they can get rid of a whole damn tier, if they get off a whole tier, then what do we have? So him coming to those conclusions, and I thought that aligned so perfectly with what I was reading, because it just brought in the question, that colonial question, for me even more. So I appreciate that.
No, that makes so much sense to me. No, I think the book was, because the Andor came out in 2022. So the book, maybe I was doing like copy edits or something. And I feel like I need to admit this or confess this to Dr. Ball. But I mean, I think since we're talking about Star Wars, this will come as no surprise. But typically I engage with visual media in precisely the way that you encourage us not to, Jared, which is like as entertainment, right? So I look for something that I was looking for something to help me just relax and turn my brain off, and got the exact opposite of that, because just like you said, Erica, it's a serious engagement with guerrilla warfare. And really, I mean, so we said we can do spoilers. Everyone dies at the end of Rogue One. Right. And in Star Wars A New Hope, the beginning is like a lot of people died to get these plans, right? So Rogue One is showing us how that unfolded. And so but knowing that this person willingly sacrifices his life at the end of his sort of political journey, and then watching Andor, it's like a story of how this person becomes politicized to the point of being willing to commit revolutionary suicide, which is deep.
Right.
And Dr. Burton, if I can jump in, and Eric, if I can jump in, I think it's Mon Mothma in Star Wars who says they died to bring this information.
That's her, yeah.
And you see the whole progression of Mon Mothma in Andor, and I hope, because I've seen all these Star Wars shows, I hope I'm not mixing up too many things in my head, but it got to the point where she realized, like, okay, I'm gonna have to sacrifice my daughter for this.
Right.
Wait, who is this? Which one is this?
The senator.
Oh,
yeah.
And this is another interesting piece. The senator and the other guy, who I think his name is Rael. Right. Just showing the necessity of people who are embedded in that petty bourgeoisie class, who are willing to commit sort of class suicide, and the sacrifices that they make, in terms of, on the one hand, being called, for lack of a better term in our context, Uncle Tom or sellouts or whatever. But actually, they're the most, revolutionary figures in their strata. I think that was really fascinating.
She got an action doll too? Dang. They don't miss a thing.
What I think is also fascinating to me, because, now that I knew we were going to have this discussion, so anyone that I knew that didn't watch, I'm like, watch it. You have to watch it. Because I've been telling people to watch Andor. It's so good. But the sort of how everyone is entangled in the rebellion, whether they wanted to be or not. And there's really no way out of it, right? Once you take your vow, that you are with the rebellion, that's it. And watching them have to make these sacrifices and think about what does that mean? Because when you look at the cousins, right? Because Mon Mothma and Vel are cousins, and you look what Vel is willing to do, and what Mon Mothma is scared to do, but has put themselves in that position where they there's no way out. So I think that kind of contrast and what we're seeing, I think really makes the show and the series really fascinating, because it humanizes all of these characters, and you get a real good character arc in 12 episodes, I think, for each of them, because you see what they have to go through, and it's one man seemingly pulling all these strings and affecting countless people's lives across class status, across so I think it's a very fascinating series.
You mentioned something in watching a lot of these YouTube videos that I've clearly, the algorithm has demanded I now watch. I've learned more about some of the techniques, and I should have made a note of it and linked, but the one of the points that they made to the issue you just raised about the character arc development and the pacing of the series. They noted in a sort of counter distinction or juxtaposition against The Walking Dead, and explained how The Walking Dead uses the method that is always a mistake in terms of incorporating all the different stories. And it was I'm not going to have it exactly right, but in other words, instead of making the audience wait through one entire person's story arc before they get to the next one, they kept people, locked in. And in this one, apparently they broke the arcs into 3 shows, roughly 3 shows each. And then I'm messing it up, but the way they broke it up and then mixed it all together so that there's never a point where you're forgetting about someone else, or you're forgetting about this other part that's happening, or not wondering, or having to wait so long for the resolution to something and then losing interest, which is what they said over time happened with Walking Dead. But I know this is just one season with Andor, but the point being that apparently they did a lot right in writing this so that it would be paced correctly. And even watching it again, it was like nothing. It was like,
right.
It was easy. It was like, man, this is
times.
yeah. I mean, I can see like it was just flowing.
Art comes from a lot of things. I mean, one of these Star Wars shows, The Mandalorian, is basically the Old Testament. I mean, they go, and there are videos devoted to how they're literally taking literal scenes from the Old Testament and putting it in Mandalorian. And when so like, what's always interesting, and I think, Dr. Ball, we've always had this discussion, is not what you include, but it's what you leave out, right? For instance, I just finished binging Stranger Things, right? Stranger Things is an extraordinary viewpoint of the 1980s from the point of view of 1980s popular culture. Like, they don't miss anything in Stranger Things out of the 80s, but they refuse to deal with race, right? So like for instance, when the superpower character goes to Chicago, who really should be black, by the way, and those kids that they're experimenting on really should be black and brown, right? But they don't want to deal with race because that would make that about race. Like, they go to Chicago and they meet this kind of, like, when she meets her sister, who's person of color, they're punk and all of this, like, just in any way, just to make sure not to make it about race, not to make it about, because she should have gone with gangs in Chicago, right?
But Todd, I don't want to do a Stranger Things thing, but I think I disagree, because
okay.
When I saw that black kid in Stranger Things, I thought I saw myself.
Right.
And from the perspective of the white writers writing for a white audience, they dealt with race exactly as white people do. They don't talk about it at all. So when that black kid went home, what we never see with his family would have been the discussions that would have filled in the gap here. But but Stranger Things is so, to me, it was again like what I liked Once Upon a Time about Seinfeld. You don't have black friends. You don't talk about race. Leave it out. Don't put it in there. And when they were hanging out with the kids, that one kid, he was thinking a lot of different things that he couldn't articulate with his white friends. And then he went home and dealt with it at home. That's what I thought about.
Okay.
And I was like, please leave it at that. And I was good. I don't want them to fake a discussion where they pretend to see some news story about Mandela or some shit. And they start talking about apartheid in the midst of monsters and what. I don't want to. So all right.
So you don't think all them kids they were experimenting on should have been black and Latino and poor that they were experimenting on? There was a lot of white kids they were experimenting on.
Yeah, I get that part. Okay, I see what you're saying. But in terms of I thought you were talking about the dynamic with the kids, and that part I was like, I thought they don't do that.
But let me go back to Star Wars for a minute and go back to the Viet Cong thing for a minute. Star Wars is supposed to be a hippie's critique of technology, right? Darth Vader represents technology overwhelming the man, right? And the whole thing about Luke losing his hand is that when he gains this technological hand, he realizes, okay, I'm on the road down to becoming my father, who is lost contact with his humanity. And that's why Luke looks down at his hand before he throws away the lightsaber in Return of the Jedi and says, I'm a Jedi like my father before me. He looks down at his hand first because he realizes he's going down this road literally. So the Ewoks, for instance, according to Lucas, the Ewoks were supposed to be like any indigenous people who proved that unity was more important than technology, because the Ewoks took everybody out, right? with some wood, right? With some wood.
I knew that when I was a kid. I was like, oh, that's us.
and the Ewoks, when I got older, started reading, and when Malcolm X is talking about, they got sneakers and a bowl of rice, right? And they're people in the United States with sneakers and a bowl of rice. So
because I had a buddy that said Chewie was his black pet. I was like, he was like, that's his black friend. It was like Han Solo. Han Solo was some fake recreation. He was like, nah, his real black. I was like, oh my God, that's deep.
Chewie is really a black. No, you tell he's black. He's got an attitude. He's annoyed. He's got to do all this shit for white people. He's a black dude.
And they can't hear him, and nobody can hear him. It just sounds like ah.
I think we're supposed to recoil at all these scenes in these bars with all these diverse species. I think we're supposed to recoil at that, right? I mean, it's like it doesn't feel like a celebration of diversity to me. It feels like his vision of some seedy dystopian world that's been overrun by like some alien species. So that also felt like some,
Right. Well, there are approved others and there's disapproved others. So the approved others are the Ewoks, Chewie, that they can be controlled, right? They can be controlled. But then you have the others that cannot be controlled, and those are the people in the bar and all of that. So that's real clear white supremacy.
So
also Mandalorian, it takes, I think it's like 5 years after Return of the Jedi, because it's a Mandalorian that takes Han Solo to Jabba the Hutt,
right,
in the original movie. So that the actual series is around that time. Just a little fun fact.
All right, but in Andor, there was a couple things that I wanted to just raise now that you all are here. So just 3 quick points. One, well, really 2. What I liked about it was that it showed the sort of the crisis of empire, the fear of those in power, the intense desire, particularly among the one who becomes the sort of sycophantic lunatic, the proto Hitler type of guy. Like he's like he can't wait. He's fixing his uniform. He's improving his uniform. He's the one doing too much. He's the one. Even his boss is like, son. He's like, slow down. And the dude is like, no, I'm going over your head. I'm trying to get this empire busy. But he's terrified, and his whole thing is he's almost to the point of it almost requires a level of delusion to put the level of focus to catch everything, to find them. He's like, they're stealing a piece over here, and then he links up with his I kept thinking of her as this guidance counselor, the woman
The
above
blonde
him.
lady, yeah.
The
She
blonde
she
lady.
was the one that put everything together. Really.
Together,
She
Exactly.
was the one, but the other guy was extremely like eager.
Right,
and-
right,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
Because
That's
he
right.
was
But
obsessive. It cost him his
obsessive, that's
career.
the
Yeah, because
word.
it cost him his career.
But it took that, and it almost cost hers, right? Because she has to challenge, she has to buck a little bit too to be heard initially at one point, and she has to battle a rival, whatever, to get rid of him and all this other, so she can finally get the boss man to hear her. But the point I'm getting at is that I just kept thinking of today, like that's the point. They are terrified. That's why they put so much effort into the surveillance,
Yeah.
and then the slow creep of empire that I'm borrowing from one of the videos I got. They kind of crystallized that point for me. But that you see the sort of slow. I guess now that you're talking about the timeline of the whole universe or whatever, it makes sense. But this is like the you see how a society is just slowly.
Yeah,
Like you
it's
said, they let
fascist
one
creep.
group
It's fascist
creep.
And I
That's it,
think
yeah.
I think Lucas was on record around designing the uniforms in a way that evoked.
Look like the Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to point out one thing that you said because it's important. I don't want it to get lost. The fact that this sort of counterintelligence agent who's putting everything together had to win out in a conflict against her rival, I think is important. Because it shows the extent to which different agents within the state are not always in alignment, and that there are contradictions within the national security state or different sort of repressive apparatuses of the state that can be exploited. And we tend to sort of think of the state as this solidified entity that always has a sort of unified goal, but that's not always the case, and this also showed that, which I thought was really important.
Yeah, I think she
America-
also.
go right
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think she also represents a form of that imperial feminism, right? Because a lot of that competition was about her not feeling like she was seen within the ranks of being the only woman amongst men. So she had to prove herself. So she was going that hard because she had to prove herself as a woman amongst men. So it just gives us a peek into that sort of identity reductionist sort of imperial feminism that she had that drive, if only because she wasn't taken seriously as a woman.
And her opponent was a brother.
Right.
What I wanted to briefly point out, because y'all going much deep on this than I am. That's why I'm glad.
Here you go. That's the setup. Now you all know the rhythm of how Dr. Burroughs works, right? That's the setup.
Now, I just want to point out what George Lucas says about Star Wars, right? As a hippie, he doesn't believe in the system, right? So what he says about Star Wars is, and what supposedly the other people who have now taken over Star Wars keep having to do, because Lucas talks about, and you see a lot of this in his YouTube videos where he says, he makes sure everything rhymes, everything kind of repeats itself. There's repeating themes in Star Wars. The main theme of Star Wars, and it's what separates it from Star Trek, by the way, is that Star Wars believes that eventually governments become corrupt. And no matter what your good intentions are, eventually you'll become corrupt and there'll need to be a new rebellion that happens. So Lucas actually believes that rebellion against evil systems is not only inevitable, but cyclical. And that's what the Star Wars universe tries to do. Star Trek believes that the system is good, that NATO is good, right? The Federation is NATO is good. And it's the people outside who are wrong. The rebels are wrong in Star Trek, but the rebels are always right in Star Wars.
Okay. I'm not a Trekkie, so surprisingly, it's not my bad. But that's an interesting
Me
perspective.
neither. Yeah, I had always heard that the Enterprise was like an extended metaphor for the spread of capitalism across the galaxy. That's why they called it the Enterprise.
It's the Enterprise.
Damn.
The Enterprise is not capitalism because
Message.
in Star Trek, right. Message. In Star Trek, the Earth is already socialist, and they say that. The Enterprise.
Okay.
The Enterprise.
Hold on, let me give it to him.
Yeah,
I found it. Let me give it to him.
Message.
Yes. the enterprise actually is a metaphor. The enterprise is not capitalism. The enterprise that they're pushing for is assimilation, because the enterprise represents assimilation within federation. They're constantly making people join the federation, but you got to follow all of these rules, et cetera, to join. But they're trying to assimilate people, which is why it's so funny that one of their main allies is the Borg, which is like the extreme of what the Federation and the Enterprise are trying to do. But they say repeatedly.
But that sounds right. That
Yes.
sounds about how capitalism is expanded, and then they side with the most right-wing extreme at times to get the final point across.
But they emphasize, in at least Star Trek: The Next Generation, they emphasize that Earth is now like a socialist utopia now.
Okay.
All right. So the one other question that I definitely had to make sure to ask is and then I do want to come back again to what Erica you raised the other day about the specifics of the prison sequence and humanism and what Ori has done in his book. But I did want to ask, how do you all deal with the question that keeps coming up for me? Like, what do we do with products like this that are this enticing and chock filled with these kinds of politics, but they are still Disney product? They are still, like, how did this even? Is there something about any of you know more about the process of how this got made? Is there something about the writers? Is this like a sneaky timing thing? Is this like just a glitch? Did Disney just? Are we snitching on them now, and Disney's going to shut it down? Like, what do you think?
Maybe Todd might know better than I the ins and outs. At least with Rogue One, I was actually pleasantly surprised to have seen a Rogue One, because that was so far out of the realm of anything Star Wars has ever produced. And Andor seems to be following that track. But I've also heard from a few of my Star Wars fans that Andor, the writing around Andor and the character itself is supposed to be a replica of a young Stalin. So I don't know how true that is.
You mean with the beard, right?
About the manifesto, but when you think about the manifesto, which we should probably talk about that manifesto too. But when you think about that manifesto, I can give some cadence to it, but I haven't really looked too far into like how it's been made or how it's passed. But I think it being a Disney product sort of speaks to the contradictions that exist anyway as is, because I don't know that we can get a product like Andor with that production, that writing, if it wasn't backed by a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Disney. I don't know if we would get this level of the type of sophistication that's coming out of the series, because it necessitates some particular sort of resource for it. But notwithstanding, that doesn't mean that Disney is not on the short list for the BDS currently, right? They're not the primary target, but they are on the short list. So we have to keep that in mind, that these are the products. But as I'm watching, I did a rewatch of Andor this week, and I'm thinking of Hamas as I'm watching certain things, because it's especially that manifesto made me think, like the words that he's reading when he actually gets a chance to sit down and actually read the manifesto.
Is this the one we're talking? I didn't mean to cut you off, but is this the right one?
Yes. To remember, this is freedom is a pure idea, and I was thinking of the resistance axis because I just finished the last episode, maybe this morning, in fact. So that's like fresh in my mind. I was like, this kind of, and then you all just so happened on the morning show to talk about the precise guerrilla warfare that's happening in Gaza. So I thought that those two things were aligned.
I like that last line too. Remember this, try. I love that. I love all of this. It's dope, man. It's dope.
If I can jump in and talk about the conflict that happens with these properties and what these properties are doing, and this is off topic, but it's not off topic. Probably the biggest advance in Black trans rights happened in Doctor Who. Doctor Who came back for some 60th anniversary specials And one of them actually dealt with Black trans rights. And although some people think that the Doctor Who Rosa Parks episode is worthy of praise, I thought it was okay. I like the episode, and I want to tell the audience, if you can handle Doctor Who, if you can handle the goofiness of Doctor Who, watch the episode Kablam, because Kablam is Doctor Who going after Amazon with both feet. They criticize Amazon from the beginning to the end. They show it as a slave shop. They show it as a place where things are made that destroy humanity. They do the whole thing, and they even have a public relations person whose job it is to sheen over all of the evil stuff that Amazon does. Again, the episode of Doctor Who is called Kablam. So there seems to be some creative tension that's allowed by these writers to go in certain directions. But while they're going in the directions, the people above them are trying to merge. I mean, you have reports now of Warner Discovery trying to merge with Paramount. And we all thought Warner Discovery was going to be bought by Apple, but Apple might buy Amazon. So, like, you know, they allow this little stuff to kind of show that they have creativity, but they're clear on hegemony. And they don't mind pointing out their own contradictions or other people's contradictions, as long as people are entertained by it. So Doctor Who is cool with Black trans rights, and they actually even make it a central part of the story. The story is called The Star Beast. If you want to watch it, like I said, you can deal with the goofiness of Doctor Who. But they're clear on we will pretend to advance society and even critique society as long as we make money from it.
Well, Dana White showed that when he signed that Bud Light contract after all the MAGA people were talking about they throwing their Bud Lights away, and Anheuser-Busch was like, let me remind you all how big this thing really is. They were like, Dana White, you know, here's a couple billy, you know, sign this contract. He was like, yes, sir. Anheuser-Busch is the greatest Bud Light. Everybody should be drinking Bud Light and watching the UFC. I was like, good Lord, that was hilarious. But my bad. Go ahead, Ori. I think
I just had a couple of thoughts. One was that Andor and Rogue One were both written by Tony Gilroy, who also wrote Michael Clayton, which I thought was a really good film. And I think he also wrote The Devil's Advocate.
Okay.
So these are, I think, you know, critiques of capitalism, critiques of law, you know. So, you know, I think there's a trajectory there.
That's right.
You know, one of the things, you know, I remember, well, there's a couple things I want to say. I don't know how much more time we have. One is that the prison scene, the prison stuff was dope. I don't usually, I don't watch films or television about prisons. It's too much. So I don't typically do that, but I was able to do this partly because I was already so invested in it, but partly because they did it so well. And one of the things that was ill is the way that labor was used to create a whole regime of discipline within the prison. Right. So they're building these little widgets. You never find out what the widgets are.
That's right.
They might be worthless. They might be essential. They might use them for something. They probably use them to keep the prison running, which is how prison labor works mostly in the real world.
You know what YouTube said that they were building in Andor?
What?
They were building parts of the Death Star.
That's what
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the episode, the last episode, after the credits, they showed the
Yeah. So they did. Okay.
And that, so you see,
but
I did have that moment of wondering if this is even anything.
Yeah, but because the political function of the labor is in some ways probably more valuable than the sort of material value of the thing that they're producing. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was really dope and showed that the writer suggested to me that maybe the writer had done some research into prison labor, because I thought that they handled that quite well, actually. But the other thing I was thinking of, like, this question, you know, what does it mean that this product comes out on Disney, you know? And part of what I thought about, at least from my own research, is that so much of the world we live in now was developed in response to, or developed in response to insurgency, right? And so part of what it feels like Andor is saying to us is, that, you know, we'll tell you a great story about guerrilla warfare because we're so confident in our ability to not allow any of this to happen, that it doesn't matter. We'll sell you
Right.
your own fantasy. And we're that confident in our ability to sort of counter any of these tactics. We know these tactics better than you do, so we'll feed them back to you. So that's kind of how it felt to me. But there's one other thing I wanted to say, which I don't think will be a surprise to anyone in the panel, but just thinking about, you know, my approach to media criticism is very much influenced by the people on this panel, but, you know, and Fanon, which I know is an influence to all of us as well, but specifically the chapter in The Dying Colonialism, where he talks about the radio and the voice of Algeria. And he talks about the radio as essentially an instrument of colonialism and how, you know, the colonized Algerians avoided the radio because of that. But as soon as the War of Liberation broke out, that Algerian people started to buy radios more, and that families would sit around and listen to the radio because they could hear, you know, their revolutionary propaganda coming through, and it changed the whole like dynamic of the household and the family structure. This is the important part, though, that once the French understood what was happening with the radio, they started to jam the radio. And so then Fanon describes how like these Algerian families would sit around the radio, and sometimes there would only be static coming through the radio. But that what was necessary at that point was that this creative labor of talking about and inventing what they think the radio would be saying in terms of the development of the movement, their revolutionary movement. And so, you know, I'm oversimplifying it. Folks should read it, you know, A Dying Colonialism. But what that has always said to me is that the question is less about is or isn't Andor revolutionary, and more about like what can we do with Andor.
Right.
And so I think so. The work that you do, the work that you all do in terms of your media criticism work, is what makes Andor potentially revolutionary. It's the way that we talk about it, the way we engage with it, the way that we create communities around this thing, which may or may not have been developed to further our interests, but like that's our responsibility. So I guess that's all I wanted to say.
I think I love that point.
Yeah.
But I think that they did make it to further our interests. I think we have allies in the Disney studio.
Well,
That's how good I think this shit is.
Because you know what that made me? It made me think of the episode "No One Is Listening," right? And that's the one thing is he's like, they don't need to surveil us. They have these floors, right? So we can plan our revolution, we can plan our liberation struggle because nobody's listening. Because they know that the second we step off, that's it. Like they have all this psychological warfare already existing that people are already scared to act. Even when they that particular tier, they started to run out, right? And now they got the guns and they're telling people, climb, do whatever you can. We're good. Let's go. And nobody stopped working. It wasn't until he came on the radio, it was like, no, there's one way out. Then people started to climb over each other, but even seeing them with guns and everything, nobody stopped working. They just looked up. It was like, what the fuck is going on? But nobody left. And nobody made any quick movements to leave. It wasn't until he got over the intercom and gave that speech that they all were like, oh shit, we could really go.
I literally stood up the first time I saw that speech. Like I was so amped. I had to literally get out of my chair. I was like, that's what I'm talking about. I was like, you damn right. I was looking around here like I had to break out of something. I was like, this is dope. But I thought also, I also thought honestly, because I thought that it was so well done, it drew all of those emotions out. I had and I don't mean to disrespect the late superhero, but I had my Rochelle McGee moment. Like I was like, what would you do if somebody busts in and put a gun on the table and said, let's go?
Right.
Like I'm standing up in my little, office or whatever. I'm getting, but in that moment, I'm like, what would you like? Or even the night before, where the leader is finally convinced. He's like, yo, they really did just wipe out a whole group. Whoa, we really don't. And I thought of Ori, your book again, when they realized, oh, wait, we're not escaped. We're not being let go. We're just being repurposed in another cage, there's no freedom here.
Right.
And then they will literally wipe out a whole whatever if once, and what also precipitated that, it wasn't a particular act. It was the narrative that you write so much about. The narrative got changed because somebody realized, oh shit, I'm not getting free.
Right.
Hey, everybody, I was just locked up over there and my clock timed out and they put me over. Word. And once the message got out, they were like, oh, we got to flush the whole floor now. We got it because it's a wrap. But then the night before that leader has to go to bed and he's like, do I believe the new narrative? Do I keep watching my number drop? And then he wakes up the next day and is like, nah.
Yeah, the time for countdown is done. We ain't counting down no more.
Oh man, I loved it. That's why I was like, yeah, I feel like
there were just so many good speeches in that. And I mean, Luthen's speech when he came up the elevator, the what did you sacrifice? But then Marva's speech at the end. I think Marva's speech and the speech when they were in the prison are similar. That we've been sleeping too long. We got used to this kind of. Yeah, we normalized this. We got used to this. We've been asleep too long. I loved Marva's speech at the end. And then to see Ferrix rise up like that was a great.
Yeah, she did. She did. That was she killed that one too. And I even liked the when can't remember her name. I'm just calling her the sister in the group. When her white girlfriend is like trying to, is getting too emotional. She's like, look. She was like, what? I mean, like, enough already. Like, I mean,
I already told you what it was. It ain't my fault you caught feelings. I already told you what it was. Yeah.
But to me, I read that as a critique of all the liberal abuses of identity, gender, sexuality, all of that we see going on right now. Where like the liberal abuses of all these important struggles. I'm like, that to me was like, no, because she wasn't condemning the relationship. She wasn't condemning the interracial, the same sex, whatever. She wasn't condemning any of that. She was condemning your lack of focus on the revolution. I was like, bar. I was just like, I loved all of that. And when dude even tells the other one, when he's like, yeah, when Andor gives his little preparatory thing, and he's like, yeah, I took a paycheck. I'm paid to be here. But don't use that. That was a
good one too.
Don't use your criticism of me to be a punk. I'm paraphrasing. It was way written better than that. But I was like that. It's like when my godfather, Mr. Porter, who's a short man, when he's like, when people, his line is, well, what would you say if I was tall? Like at some point you got to focus on the argument. Like you could call me short, you could call me paid, whatever the dude would say. Yeah, I took a paycheck. Yeah, I got a fancy gem. What? But what does that have to do with you wanting to punk out? And dude lowered his head. I was like, yes. Woo! Yeah, this thing is dope.
Aldani had a whole bunch of people who were working for the Empire or who have worked for Empire. And I think that really was what made Andor interesting. It was so many class dynamics that were working apart on the side of the rebellion, like people who were former stormtroopers or colonels, like high-ranking positions, the senator even. So, but I think Lutheran though is a fascinating character, especially after the "What did you sacrifice" speech, because I don't know how much of it is madness and how much of it is like that extreme focus towards an objective, right? Because it's a zoom focus. And he talked about having planned this years and years ago and just been on this trajectory since where he can't get off the trajectory. And now he's way in too deep. Like he has nothing if he stops.
There is a line in there because I've been looping it and putting beats under it and repurposing it but there's a line in there where he acknowledges, to your point about his mindset. He's like my ego won't let me give this up. It's like he's even recognizing this might not be fully legit. I might be caught up in something, but it's a wrap, but I'm here. And I fully identify with that. Yeah.
There are some like standard speeches that actors use to like audition for parts. And while Andor was airing, at least one YouTuber said that Luthen speech, "What did I sacrifice?" is probably going to be one of the 21st century speeches that actors use to prove their chops. That speech resonated.
That speech was great
around like the whole web.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I know
a good one.
Ready coming up that elevator.
He thought he had something too. It reminds me of my daughter sometime. Like, what have you been doing all day? While I've been working hard at school, Daddy. Like, what? What have I sacrificed?
It's interesting. I'm sorry. Erica brought up, I think you brought up violence earlier. And I just wanted to bring up one thing before I forget, which is that I don't know if folks remember when Rogue One first came out. There's a scene in the beginning where Cassian Andor, the main character, gets into some kind of conflict and he has to make a decision about what to do. And he just offs somebody. Like, it's like one of the first scenes in the movie. He just offs somebody. And I remember there was some chatter about whether or not that was justified or whatever, right? The show Andor starts with a similar kind of scene when he's accosted by these two cops who are basically trying to fleece him. And he has to make the same decision too there, but there's more remorse. And he has to think more about whether or not he's going to off these two cops. And he eventually does, because he realizes that his survival depends on it. And so it was just an interesting way to tell a story in reverse about how he got to that point in the beginning of the film, where he just off somebody without even thinking about it, and there seems to be no remorse. And I think
that's deep.
Yeah, it was dope.
What I also liked about that scene in Andor is that the way I remember it, even watching it again, the way I think I saw it again, is that the after the first cop is killed almost by accident, the second one is begging for his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's his reaction that convinces Andor that it's got to happen. Because once he's telling the story, he's trying to run a story that I'll bring you in and we can work this out together. And he can hear this don't make no sense. And then his face drops because he's like, this guy got to kill me. Like, this don't even make. And then then it seems like Andor's like, yeah, you're right, I do. And then he does.
And then there's this question about violence within movements, because after the expropriation is successfully pulled off, the dude Rael and his second in command, the blonde woman, I don't remember her name, they decide that it's in their best interest to off Andor, because they never really trusted him, and they were trying to protect this infrastructure that they had built, and so that's the decision they made. And I think that was handled in such a way that forces the audience to contend with the legitimacy of that question. Not to necessarily say that their choice was the right or wrong choice, but again, they approached it in such a way where it's like, yo, this is a real contradiction.
I think with Krieger too.
What's that?
With what?
With Krieger too.
Who's
when
Krieger?
they were deciding whether or not they should tell Krieger that the ISB was onto them,
Right.
and they kept trying to say, well, it's only 30 men. It's just 30 men. Because we could either tell him and blow this shit up for all of us involved, or we can sacrifice 30 men. And I think that really kind of, because even you could see in that scene with Forrest Whitaker, because that's a scene, and he's thinking it through, like, he's trying to decide, should I trust you, though? Because if you could off 30 people like that, what could you do with me? And, so I think that these are real questions that people have to, and it made me think of your book in terms of the abolition geography and how things were handled in terms of tribunals and that split decision to execute. Like, how are those things, how do people come to these terms and these decision making?
And these two cats who are literally meeting underground, I thought of them as members of different underground cells because neither of them is admitting to the other that they were responsible for the expropriation,
Right.
keeping their actions like totally separate and maintaining like plausible deniability or whatever. I mean, it was really, really interesting.
I'm gonna interrupt this deepness for a second and deep for a second, and then y'all can go back to being real deep because all y'all three is real deep. One of the things about Star Wars, because again, as we know, when geeks talk about Star Wars on YouTube and they get too excited, somebody reminds us, look, it's a movie about space wizards, right? And so to show you how deep Star Wars has now gotten with Andor, there was always this big controversy over who shot first, Greedo or Han Solo, right? And that's like a big controversy within geekdom in terms of Star Wars, because depending on who shot first, Han Solo is either a hero or an anti-hero or a villain, right? So the fact that Star Wars has graduated to talk about these very sophisticated things shows the importance of this particular show. But I also want to say that this is one of the least liked Star Wars shows in the Star Wars canon. Of all the TV shows, all the movies, the fans like this the least because it doesn't have this kind of, fairy tale comic book, the good
Right.
Jedi and the bad, Sith and all of that.
The Jedis are the enemy, man. They all need to go. I think that they're the ones that are standing in the way of this
Of the rebellion.
revolution from the ground up. They're the ones that's always flipping and turning evil and causing all the problems. They need to go.
They're the petty bourgeoisie.
They need to go.
They're the Palestinian Authority.
I never thought of the Jedi as a Palestinian Authority. Damn, Erica, thank you. Damn. Because if you watch the prequels, they really are that because they're corrupted by the government they serve. So actually, Erica, that's wonderful. You need to write an essay on that for real. I love it.
By the way, links to everybody's work on screen is in the show description. So if anyone watches this and is not familiar, please get familiar. But Erica, I want to make sure you get your if we can come back and focus on that point you were raising that I was not and am not still prepared to address that you raised if it hasn't been addressed already. But this, as I'm remembering it, your question about chapter 2 in particular, I think, and
I think House of Humanism is in chapter 2.
Yeah.
So that struck me, for all the reasons that I named, but in terms of like grounding it and putting it in the context of Andor. So I think I talked about it earlier when I said Andor, you can see a lot of what's happening with the empire is a lot of cultural imperialism, right? Because they're taking people's land. So it's not just a basic colonialism. Like they're taking cultures and they're stealing land and they're targeting the cultural cemeteries. You can see, and then even Lutheran, right? He works for a cultural artifacts place, right? Ironically. So that plays a big part in how they are describing what the empire is doing to these different planets and these different people and how they are subjugating these people because they're wiping out particular conditions because everyone from Ferrix is not a daughter of Ferrix, right? And everyone from Ferrix is not of Ferrix. Like there's people that are having to be moved around because of these conditions that the empire created. But also when you look at like in terms of the prison scene, right? There is a specific understanding about their conditions that causes them to then resist. And I'm wondering in terms of how we understand our conditions, even when I juxtapose it with Palestine and understanding our colonial conditions. And then even in Tip of the Spear, where it's talking about a specific intensity happening within the prisons that sharpen that understanding. The way that the contradictions sharpen, it all comes to a head of resistance. And that was something that I noted in both the book, but it plays out in Andor. Because even what's his name? Nemec, who writes the manifesto, when he talks about his dad's pepper farm and all of that, he comes to particular conclusions in order to write that manifesto because of his material conditions. But he also comes to conclusions about the necessity of resistance. And so he's working under the rebellion, but I'm thinking I'm unpacking this in real time, so I'm hoping that it's not convoluted. But because I've actually been playing with this with a bunch of people, so a bunch of people probably heard me try to figure out or talk through this. But I do think that there's some parallels and intersections between Tip of the Spear, at least with that chapter, that pulls out counter-humanism and what we observe in Andor, because they do need to have that whole dehumanizing process to put those people to sleep. That's what Marva is waking them up from. Like, remember who we are, remember the people that we came from. So once it clicked for them, that was the resistance. So in terms of understanding Andor, Tip of the Spear, and then within our context, like, I guess the question of, is Andor revolutionary? I'm thinking about it in that way of how do we then begin to unpack understanding our material conditions as an internally colonized people? Because that is not a mass understanding. And I'm wondering that if that lack of understanding is the cause of a lack of resistance, because we can talk about it in real, like, in the actual material conditions that's playing out in Palestine, but then you could talk about it through Tip of the Spear, some of the things that are mentioned in Tip of the Spear, but then you can also see it in a more fictional basis through Andor. And I'm of the mind, because I read a lot of fiction books from Black women, that there's a lot to be learned in fiction. So I don't think that we can watch Andor and then say, oh, this is just a show that we can't take anything from. But I think what I'm raising is some of the ideas that we can pull from.
Erica, can I jump in and recommend a masterpiece written by a Black woman? Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor.
Okay.
She writes a lot of young adult novels about Black women who get powers and abilities.
Yeah, Akata Witch and yeah.
Right. But Who Fears Death is her masterpiece. And anybody who wants to read an excellent book about Black women and having power and agency and in a sci-fi concept, that book is recommended 100% by me.
So I guess Dr. Ori, if you want to take a stab, because I don't know, I've come to decide that maybe I don't ask the easiest of questions, right? Because I think I put a lot of context into what I'm trying to, I'm thinking out loud most times. So I'm interested if it, one, makes sense, but then how would you unpack it?
Well, no, it makes sense. You got a lot of threads there. Andor didn't immediately raise the question of humanism for me. The one thing that is interesting, I wonder if they're going to explore it more in the second season, is the culture that Andor belonged to before the Empire. I mean, they made it seem like he was, I think they were trying to make it seem like he was indigenous to the land that he was on, and then, the Empire comes and sort of tears him from that land. So I'm interested in what their ways of life were. It seemed like it was a society that was just children. Is that because the Empire took all of the adults and it killed them, or what was that about? I would assume that they had a different way of living, different than how they're being forced to sort of live under sort of imperial rule. What I was trying to do in Tip of the Spear in terms of humanism, and I think maybe why this came up for you, or part of why it came up for you in Andor, is again, I think the writers of Andor read revolutionary theory and took it very seriously, and at the core of various strands of revolutionary theory is the question of the human, right? So like Che Guevara talks about the new man, Fanon talks about the new man, Sylvia Wynter talks about, a new genre, right? And so, this question of how to evolve the human species, right? Cesar is critiquing, white Western humanism. So I think it's always there. I think that maybe is always one of the core, if not the core questions of revolutionary theory. What I was trying to do in Tip of the Spear is a couple things in terms of humanism. One is to challenge this idea that often gets asserted, that incarcerated people just want to be treated as human beings, right? Which is essentially like an attempt to expand the category of the human and incorporate, the different kinds of excluded groups into that category. Whereas, if you look at the Enlightenment thinkers who sort of defined humanism in the first place, it was always defined in opposition to us. We are the antithesis of the human that they theorize. So it's a flawed, white supremacist, incomplete, individualistic characteristic, which I think needs to, in fact, be destabilized, if not abolished. And so what I tried to do, so I tried to just articulate that as clearly as I could in the book. And then I tried to show how, just like you kind of said, Erica, there's something, and Fanon and others have said this, there's something productive about the act of rebellion, which helps to call this new kind of humanism into being through the process of rebellion. It's not necessarily something that is defined in advance, but it's improvised and cultivated through the very act of freeing oneself from colonial domination. So I tried to show that happening. And then lastly, especially in chapter 2, I talk about this idea of counter-humanism, which is, again, it's on the one hand, it's bringing this new kind of humanism into being through rebellion, but that's the sort of maximum demand of revolutionary new humanism. But they're also in this context in which they're prevented at every stage from living, from being, from existing, through incarceration, through these technologies of psychological warfare, through physical and sexual violence constantly. And so in response to that, I tried to show them doing, and again, this comes out of Fanon. It's like, look, if you're not going to allow us to be recognized as humans, then we're going to redistribute the trauma and the suffering. And like, it ain't just going to be us who's suffering. And this is similar to what Dhoruba always talks about in terms of, the function of the BLA was to redistribute the pain. So it was like, okay, if you're gonna prevent us from being human, then ain't nobody gonna live in peace. No one's gonna be human. So those are the kinds of things that I sort of tried to show unfolding in the book.
And Eric, if you had follow-up, please do. I just wanted to note very quickly that the one you mentioned, the way they try to depict young Andor and his like Lord of the Flies type of
right?
society. But I can't help the one scene that bothers me, and it bothered me again watching it, try to be for today, was when they're exploring that ship, the downed ship with all the dead whatever and the green gas or whatever, and the older, she's still probably a girl, but older teen maybe, who's the leader, that young Andor clearly is a little enamored with, is she's going down to investigate. When the dude gets up with the gun, how come nobody says anything? There's like 50 kids standing around watching, and he slowly gets up, points the gun, then shoots, kills her, and then hundreds of kids seem to emerge out of nowhere screaming and shooting darts and stuff. I was like, not one person is going to say, yo, he's getting up, or do a little, whatever the little chirp signals they were doing. So I'm sorry. That was just one thing that kind of was messing with me. I was like, man, come on, man.
No,
Somebody say something.
I think that was, I can make a reach here, but I feel like the way they made that scene, like they've never seen any of this before, so this was all new to them.
That's true.
They wouldn't have known how to react.
Good point.
Right, because they didn't speak the language, right? So they wouldn't know. But I think that is a good question that you raised, like whether or not it was just only children there. Because I think what happened to their plan is a product of the Republic first, and then the Empire started that mining. So something could have happened to the parents. They could have been taken from the land and then left there.
Yeah, sorry, because he's never asking, when he's searching for his sister, he's never asking a question about what happened to my parents or anything. They must know. Right. So that part wasn't a mystery.
That's probably why the kids were so close, because they all had to look after each other. And then Marva and Clem, of course, they know the Empire very well, so they knew that if he stayed, he'd have been dead. Because I think all those kids are dead. I don't think anybody's left. from that island. I mean, from that planet, which is why Marvel preferred that he never speak about it again. But there's something from I think it's page 76 that really when you say, when we peel back the many layers of rage, suffering, and revenge fantasy, when we listen for the rhythms of the heartbeats of struggle and read the text of unwritten and unspoken demands, when we strive for intimacy with the inner logic of revolt, what we find is neither a desire for incorporation into the world nor dominance over it. Instead, we find an active desire for a new regime of human and a new world where it can thrive. And that is what made me think of There's Only One Way Out, because that's essentially what he's saying. So that's why I thought there was parallels, or at least an intersection between that part of the book and the overarching theme of Andor.
No, that's deep.
Now listen.
No, please. Don't.
Now listen. That's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
No, that's deep. I mean, you've just given me a real gift to be able to hear how something that I said is helping you think about this other thing. No, that makes sense. And, you know, yeah, part of what I was just trying to do there is to disabuse us of feeling like we have to take our enemy's description and understanding of our politics and our goals at face value, because they actually don't understand our politics. And so that's sort of what I was trying to say there.
I don't mean to bring us back down another several levels, but the other thing that I liked about the series is that there was no silly sex scenes. The romance between what's her name and her fake boyfriend, it's you know, yeah, we get it. She's taking off her coat. We get it. We know what happens. Let's move on. I was like, yeah, yes. So that was just another silly thing for me to add to this. But
I did think
go ahead,
the character of Bix, though, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Bix,
Which one is that?
the girl, the one that Andor comes back for,
Oh,
because
okay,
they're
yeah.
really
Oh, right,
elusive
right,
about
right.
their relationship. They don't really go into details about why they're so close or why he has such affinity for Bix specifically. But there's obviously a past relationship there. But also, like the type of psychological warfare that they enacted on Bix.
Right.
Because you can also see that with the prisoners, right? Because when he came in and he's like, Bix, we gotta go. She's like, no, they'll get mad. We can't go. I'm not leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was, and that's not how we met Bix.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't meet Bix like that. We met like fiery Bix, and then to see what by the last episode what Bix had become because of that sort of psychological warfare was really impactful, I think, because Bix was not. Remember, they were like outside of the window because they could hear the what was happening for Marva, but they were not trying to escape or move or anything. Like they were just so fearful, and I think that speaks to the Empire specifically, right? Because much of the Empire's tactics is psychological, because you could see that they can't really win militarily. Like, look what happened to Aldhani. It was like, how many of them? It was like 5 of them. So they can't really win in that way, but they do with psychological warfare. And that's something that is like a through line in all of Star Wars, from like New Hope to this.
You know, it's interesting because the all of the strategies, the repressive strategies that they are using in the show are more or less the same repressive strategies that the state uses against movements now, and are more or less the same repressive strategies that the state used in movements of past. I have yet to talk to anyone who's been able to convince me that the state has any new repressive strategies. They have new technologies and new gadgets which allow for new tactics, but in general, they don't have no new strategies, you know. And I think what Erica just pointed out is really important, but I think it also shows that.
My battery's about to run out, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave now, and there'll be space for somebody to come in, because I know somebody wants to come in from the chat. So look,
no, we got to wrap soon anyway. I got to go pick up my
I gotta go get my
daughters,
son.
and yeah, we got kids to pick up,
Parents.
so we can wrap it. We can,
Responsibilities.
yeah.
All right.
But on the way out, Todd, thank you for coming through. Always good to see you. We'll catch you again as soon as possible.
Thank you so
but
much.
I did, yeah, definitely thank you, Todd, my man. Always good.
Thank you guys, Erica. Thank you.
But I did think it would be, just to that last point. I mean, that's what I read in this manifesto. And remember this: the imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. And I think that is bars. And I think that the series does a great job of demonstrating that. And then I think if people watch it in conjunction with Ori's book, it gets even more, so.
Yeah.
Listen, anything you all want to add? I mean, this has been dope for me. I love it. I appreciate you all making me watch this and it being as good as you all said it would be. And I love that we can dovetail it with some discussion of Tip of the Spear and all this other stuff. But yeah, anything you all want to?
No, this was great for me because I am a Star Wars mega super fan. Return of the Jedi is actually my favorite one, but that's personal.
Look at this. Why
That's my favorite one. My dad and I watched that one repeatedly. That's the only one I had on VHS. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. I have these conversations. I wish everyone, may the force be with you every year. So this is serious, right? I'm not a passive viewer. So I really, really appreciated this conversation. And then even being able to raise it with you, Dr. Burton, because it is some things that I've been thinking through and thinking about and trying to figure out, like, how do I put this language together to make it something I can actually put on paper that makes sense. So I'm deeply appreciative to be able to have this conversation. I've been wanting to speak about nerd stuff with Todd for a long time. So if you ever want to bring us back for Marvel, because I have a lot of
absolutely.
Yo, when the new season comes out, we gotta get into it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Of Andor.
I think we should be doing like one of these per episode next time when it comes out. Yeah, recap. Let's go. Like I'm fully, No, this is great. And the issue was always Todd, his battery, his schedule, his Mumia book writing. It's always, I mean, he don't these cats, I'd be trying to drag them over here as much as possible. So, but yeah. Well, listen, Erica, Ori, thank you very much. This has been fantastic. Thanks to everybody in the chat. Looking forward to doing this again as soon as possible. Peace, as always. Like Fred Hampton used to say, if you're willing to fight for it, please do watch the series and get the book and read the book. And we'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like It through the BPM platform. Peace, everybody.
Peace.
Oh, I hit the wrong button. Now I got to do this all over again. I ruined my outro. Dang, that's messed up. Now I'm talking through it and everything. This is terrible. What is going on?
And what do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, have set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.